As humans, the first thing we tend to look at when we're looking at another living being, whether that be a human or an animal, is the eyes. It's how we connect with things emotionally. So we know how important it is to focus on the eyes in our paintings. Even tiny tweaks can make a huge difference when you're painting animal eyes. So in this video, we're going to be covering 5 of my favorite tips for painting more realistic and captivating animal eyes. Although we're talking about eyes in this video, another topic that a lot of artists struggle with is painting animal fur. So if you're one of those that's struggling to get realistic animal fur in your paintings, I created a free guide just for you, and you can check it out in the description of this video. The first tip is going to be to nail the shape of your eye first. Eye shape is going to vary based on different animals, and it's really important that you are actually getting that shape right. There's quite a lot happening when it comes to eyes. You're looking at the actual eye itself, but then there's also features around the eyes. You're going to have eyelashes and eyelids and different textures around those eyes. The shape, texture, detail, quality of all of that stuff is really important. So right at the beginning of your painting, I find it super helpful to make sure you are really locking that in by focusing on the shape of all of those different components first. For instance, eyes are rarely just a circle. There are going to be different shapes, and even the way that the eyelid is going to be around that eye is going to make a huge difference. Even the way that the eyelid kind of curves around the tear duct, or if it curves around different components of the eye based on how close that eye is, all of that can make a huge difference in making those eyes really realistic. So, when you're first starting your painting, I highly recommend to really pay attention to the eye in your reference photo. And when you're working on your sketch or your underpainting to get those different features locked in, pay a little bit more attention here. Make sure that you are using different techniques, whether that be negative space around it to be able to get that shape more accurately, or if you are transferring lines of your sketch, making sure that shape is locked in first is going to make it so much easier once you start painting. You also have to remember that the eyes are essentially a rough sphere shaped, shoved into the eye socket. They're not just pasted on top like a sticker. So having that 3D form of the eye is going to be really, really important. You have to remember that it has 3D form to it. It's a sphere, a rough sphere, but it's mostly a sphere. And the way that light is going to be bouncing off that eye is going to be dictated by that shape. So for instance, if you have a highlight that is just, a perfect line across, that's going to look really strange. But if you have a highlight that's reflecting the sky, let's say, and you have that highlight curved to match the arc of the shape of that eye, it's immediately going to tell the eye of that viewer saying, hey, that eye is a curved shape, and it's going to look so much more realistic. The second tip on how to paint more realistic eyes is to focus on values first before color. I get it. Color's super fun, and it's really tempting to jump in really early with all of that beautiful radiant color that we want to put into our portraits. But it is so much more important that you first focus on values and then worry about color later. So one of my favorite parts about the technique of oil painting that I specifically teach is that when you're building your underpainting, you're focusing on values first. Yes, we are putting some color in it, but through the glazing technique that I share, that is where you can really dial up the color after you've already built your solid underpainting, which you're focusing on your values, and then you're building up your detail and texture. And then after that, once your layer is completely dry, you can go and do some glazing after and then really amp up that color without ruining any of your hard work. Value contrast, that's going to be the relationship of the lights and the darks in your painting, is really what's going to breathe life into your animal portraits. It's what dictates what you expect to see from an animal. It shows off the 3D form and shape of that animal. If you don't pay attention to your values, you're going to end up with a really flat painting. And if you end up with flat eyes, that's just not the look we want to be going for in our animal portraits. So think about it. If you're only using black and white, you can still create an absolutely gorgeous painting of an eye that is super dynamic and lifelike and totally captivates the viewer. But if you were just to use colors, it's not going to look right. It's not going to show off that form and the structure of the eye right. So you have to focus on values first. So typically, one of the important things you're going to have to remember is that there's going to be different components casting shadows, right? So when you have the eye and you have the eyelid is going to be casting a shadow in that eye. And when you paint that shadow from that lid, it's going to really show off that 3D shape of the eye and actually the depth as well. So when you're starting your animal portrait and you're looking at those eyes, maybe put the colors aside first. Maybe you can use a little bit, but don't worry too much about color just yet. Focus on using your values to build up the 3D shape of that eye first, focusing then on the beautiful textures that you're going to see in the eye, and then worry about color later once you know that your values are rock solid. So, the third tip is to use subtle color shifts. Now, again, this is where glazing totally comes in clutch here because I know it's my favorite technique. I'll never stop talking about it because it's amazing. But eyes are super complex. Rarely are eyes one color. I mean, go into a mirror and look at your own eyes. There's so many subtle color shifts in there, and that applies to eyes across the animal kingdom. So if you want to have really beautiful, lifelike eyes, you're going to want to make sure that you're capturing those color shifts. And personally, the easiest way I think to do this is through glazing. Once you've completed your underpainting and added all that beautiful texture and detail, when your focus is on values first, then you can go in with those glazes and you can add those subtle color shifts without worrying about covering up any of your hard work. You just go in with your favorite glazing medium and your transparent pigments that you're going to use, and then you can just push and pull those different colors to add so much life and vibrancy to your eyes. So when you are at this stage, take your reference photo, zoom in super close on the eyes, and take a sec to really identify what colors you're going to be looking at. Maybe there's a different color around the pupil. Maybe there's just a weird patch of color that appears. Maybe there's certain textures in the eyes that are going to be different colors. Or maybe the shadows are going to have a different level of color than the highlights in your eyes. All of these things are really, really important. And if you're paying attention to them and making sure that you're getting them in your painting, you're going to have gorgeous paintings of eyes. Another thing that you can pay attention to as well is the color temperature. In most cases, shadows are going to be leaning a little more cooler. So you're going to have more blues and purples in there, whereas highlights tend to be a little bit warmer, where you kind of have more of those golden tones. So this can be another really great way to add that lifelike quality to your eyes. You can do a glaze wash of a cooler tone shadow and then wash the rest of the eye or glaze the rest of the highlighted portion with your eye with something that's a bit warmer, and it's going to add so much life. So the fourth tip is going to be to add a thoughtful catch light or highlight. So eyes are spherical for one thing. They're typically like balls inside the head. And this shape is really important because light is going to bounce off of it in a very specific way. You're not going to get these hard, straight edges in your highlights. That's going to look really unnatural. But you're going to get these beautiful arcs that are following the 3D shape of that eye. The other thing you have to remember is that eyes are wet. They are going to be and wet surfaces tend to reflect a lot more light in a more dramatic way. Whereas if you have something that's dry and a little bit more matte, you might not have as dramatic highlights, but eyes are wet. So typically you are going to see some really sharp, harsh highlights in very specific parts on these eyes. And if you place those little highlights in the right area, it can totally transform your painting in literally one little brushstroke. Now, this is easier said than done. Eyes are definitely tricky. There's so much to pay attention to. And if you are not paying attention to the right size of catchlight or where it is on your eye, it might make your painting look too cartoony, which is definitely not what we want. So in most cases, I tend to keep those catch lights or those really bright pops of light that you see in the eye really small and really minimal. And if you find that it's not enough, then go back and make it a little bit bigger. But I find that it's too easy to edge into that sort of cartoony character look if you start with too big of a bright dot. So start on the smaller side, take a physical step back from your painting, and if it's not quite enough, go and then adjust it. So you want to keep it small and crisp, and typically you want to have that super bright catch light where that light is coming from. The other thing to remember is that if you're painting a portrait with two eyes, you have to remember that they are both being lit by that same light source. So you want to make sure that you are placing that super bright catch light in vaguely the same area. But depending on how the shadows are falling in your portrait, that might also change. So take a good hard look at your reference photo before you start adding these catch lights, because it's one of those little things that, when done correctly, can make a world of difference in your art. But when it's done incorrectly, it can make things look pretty off. My favorite way of doing this is right at the end of your portrait, take the tiniest brush that you have, dip it straight into pure titanium light, and put the tiniest little dot on those eyes. And it's going to add just the perfect amount of sparkle. So the fifth tip that we're going to be talking today about to make realistic eye paintings is to not forget about the surroundings. Yes, painting the actual eye itself is super fun. You've got tons of really cool textures. You've got all this crazy light bouncing within the eye, creating something super fun and interesting. You often have really gorgeous colors. But if you only put all of your focus in the actual eye itself and then forget about the surrounding part of the animal, it's still going to fall flat. So don't forget about eyelashes or the actual hair and fur around the eyes, or things like wrinkles or the mucous membrane around eyes. Those are typically going to be damp, so they're going to be reflecting more light. So you're going to have another great opportunity to use light sources here to add another sparkle. But you do have to remember that you have to focus on the surrounding area as well. When you do focus on these other components around the eye itself, it's going to set in stone the fact that this eye is a 3D object. The actual eye is not just glued on top, it is set in the face and not floating. So one of my favorite ways to do this is to make sure that you are letting a couple individual hairs actually cross over that eye. So if this animal actually has eyelashes, certain animals have amazing eyelashes, like horses and cows. And if you actually paint those going over the eye, it's going to really lock in that 3D structure, and it's just going to make things so much more beautiful. Even if you're just painting something like a portrait of a dog, allowing a couple of those individual hairs above the eye to kind of pass over the eye itself is going to add so much life. I know, eyes are complicated, but personally, they're one of my favorite things to paint because they're so interesting. But each time you paint them, it definitely represents a fun challenge. So hopefully these tips are going to be really helpful for you to create more beautiful and lifelike paintings of eyes. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.